welcome for the first time Christine Pride, and welcome back, this time virtually, Jo Piazza, for their new novel, We Are Not Like Them, a Good Morning America book club selection. The book's been getting raves from reviewers and also, may I just say, lots and lots and lots of wonderful authors. Booklist wrote that co-authors Pride and Piazza explore how the sanctity of childhood friendship could be questioned and corrupted well into adulthood, and how violent racial injustice is ubiquitous in American life. We Are Not Like Them is spellbinding from cover to cover. Christine Pride has held editorial positions at Doubleday, Crown, and Simon & Schuster. She's published a wide range of books, including several New York Times bestsellers and Penn's Race Matters column for the Cup of Joe. Jo Piazza is the author of books such as Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win, How to Be Married, and The Knockoff. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN. We are so honored for this event to be having Pride and Piazza in conversation with Nancy Johnson, the author of The Kindest Lie, who appeared virtually at Boswell earlier this year and is featured in our holiday newsletter as one of our favorite books of the year. When I really love an author and I think they're really great conversationalists, I ask them who would they love to talk to, and Nancy immediately said, I would love to talk to Christine Pride and Jo Piazza. And I said, what a coincidence. I would love for you to do that. So welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us.
Yay.
Virtual class.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Here.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. And I'm so excited to be here with you, Christine and Jo, to talk about this incredible book, We Are Not Like Them. And so this publishing industry is just such a small business. So I just want to say that, Christine, you and I met years ago. Like we were just saying,
we were trying to figure out, exactly what year.
Like what year it was, whether it was 5 or 6 years ago, because I had written my debut novel, at least had a manuscript for The Kindest Lie, and then I submitted it to you for a manuscript critique at a conference, a writing conference. And so it's one of those situations where you're so nervous, you know, and you know how that is too, Jo, you know, submit your manuscript to, you know, a top editor at Simon & Schuster, and then just to think that we've come full circle and now here we are. And I was just so excited to hear from you, both of you, and to you to ask me to do an early read of the book and then to give words of praise. And so I was just excited to read it and then to blurb this incredible book.
So appreciate it. And it really is the great thing about this business, how, you know, just everybody's roads kind of overlap. And so, I mean, I remember meeting you when we had such a great meeting. And then I was so excited when I saw your book sold and I wrote you a nice note and then it was published. And, you know, I just feel like I've been with you every step of the journey. And now here we are talking about another book. So
yeah, we were just saying earlier that writers are just such good people. So, so anyway, I'm a former journalist, so I don't like to bury the lead. So I want to talk about the exciting news that you guys got recently, that this book, okay, it's got the little insignia there for Good Morning America. It is a Good Morning America book club pick for October. So tell us, why don't you start, Jo? Tell us, what was it like when you found out, when you got the news?
So this story is
a good story.
Good story.
Okay, I can't wait.
And we've known for like 6 months, and we've like had to keep it quiet for 6 months, which is impossible. I used to be a gossip columnist. I like to get shit out there. The day that we found out, I was actually going to Christine's house to like do some like final edits or something. And I live in Philly, and I take the train up, but I was stuck in the subway and getting all these weird texts like from our like
there's news.
There's news. We're like, can you get on the phone right away? Which she's like, I never want that text. So I was like, what's happening? And so I finally get out, and then I like run to Christine's apartment. And she's in there. She's like, "Where's the Good Morning America book club pick?"
There's lots of screaming and dancing around. Then we were sworn to secrecy, as Jo said. But we went out that night. We had drinks with our agents. And then Jo and I always go to this place, Fumo in Harlem, New York, to celebrate different book milestones. So we went to Fumo. We had perhaps too many drinks at
We
Fumo.
had like 11 tequila drinks.
So we're still at the bar when it's like closing down, and we tell the bartender our news. Like, we've been sworn to secrecy. It's like been approximately 8 hours, and we tell the bartender.
You swore him
Luckily,
to secrecy.
yeah,
we
luckily,
swore Tiffany to secrecy, and we gave
Tiffany
her
never told a soul, and that was it. Like, we told one person, and then
Tiffany,
we
and
kept
then-
the secret.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so fun. And then I know the book club picks, you guys usually get interviewed by the infamous Deborah Roberts. And so I know that has not aired yet, but have you guys done the interview with Deb yet?
We did.
We did.
Yeah, we did it on launch day. And so launch day, we went to Times Square like 7 a.m. to see it on the billboard when they announced it, which was so surreal and crazy. And we almost missed it. We actually only have a video of me like running, like to try to like see it from like the studio. And then
which is the best place for something like that to happen, because for those of you who've been to Times Square, like everyone is just like completely nonplussed around us. Like, we're in bright pink matching sweatshirts with the book title on it, like carrying the books. And Times Square at 8 a.m. people are just like, okay.
Yeah.
Who are these crazy ladies?
But Deborah was the best. Like I was telling you earlier, so we sit down, we were like immediately comfortable with her. Like, she was so great. And she was also like, so much of what you wrote about Riley, your character, was my own life as a broadcast journalist. And I saw so much of myself in it. We sit down on the couch, and all of a sudden her phone rings, and it's Al Roker FaceTiming her. And so then we're FaceTiming with Al Roker, like first thing, launch day morning. And her questions were just so thoughtful and great. Like, I've done so many interviews, right? Like, I've interviewed people and then like been interviewed, but like, you could tell she genuinely liked the book and was into what we're trying to do. So that was so cool.
That's very nice.
That's an amazing experience, like a pinch me moment for you guys that so many authors dream of, a moment like that. So yeah, thanks for giving us.
Take it for granted. Somebody asked us earlier, are you really embracing the moment? And we really are. This is not, nothing is a foregone conclusion, and nothing, like, we worked hard, but lots of authors work hard. There's always a dash of timing and luck and in all of these situations. And so we really just are so grateful, mainly for everything that's happened. It's just so fun, and we're so grateful.
Oh, love your humility. Love it. Love it. So before we get into a discussion of the book itself, everybody be sure to put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those later in the conversation. So be sure to do that. Also be sure to buy the book too, after we finish talking, not right this second. So I want to know what the book is about. So tell everybody, for those who haven't read it, give us a brief overview. Why don't you do that, Christine?
Sure. So We Are Not Like Them is the story of a lifelong friendship between a Black woman named Riley and a white woman named Jen. And they met when they were children. And now they've reconnected, as the novel opens, in a way, because Riley has just moved back to their hometown for a big news job. She's kind of worked her way up the ranks and is now going to be at the local station in Philadelphia, bigger market. And Jen is pregnant with her first child with her husband, who's a police officer in Philadelphia. And as the novel opens, the very first chapter, we learn that Kevin, Jen's husband, has been involved in the shooting of an unarmed Black teenager. And so what happens in the aftermath of that, in terms of both Riley having to cover the story now, Jen obviously hitting close to home for her, and then what it brings up for them in their relationship.
And you open the novel with a prologue that I just thought was so powerful and poignant. And you hear from this 14-year-old Black boy who's been shot by police. And it was so poignant to me, I think, because I think about all of the Black boys and the Black men who have been killed by police, and you never get to hear what they're thinking. You don't hear their voices. You hear their families, the attorney for the family, and then later everyday people, we hear from them and, hear them, saying the name and using it as a hashtag, but we rarely hear from the person, the victim of it. And just want to read a couple, just like 2 lines here that really struck me. And this is from the boy. He tries to stop himself from thinking about his mother. He knows what her cries will sound like because he heard them when his dad died 4 years ago. He won't be able to comfort her as he did then, rubbing her back, telling her, it's okay, even though it wasn't, even though he was terrified that he now had to be the man of the house. And so that just gripped me. It was just very gut-wrenching. Tell me about the choice to begin this book that way.
Yeah, the prologue came before almost anything else, and for exactly the reasons that you described. Though we knew we wanted to write a book about a friendship, and that was going to be the main focus of the story, it was really important for us in terms of, the origins of the premise itself, right? Which was to take readers behind these headlines that we hear all the time, and that pile up in such a way that people can be desensitized. And as you expressed so eloquently, Nancy, it's just like so easy just for these names to be anonymous people. And it's like, who is that again? Oh yeah, I remember that. Was that in St. Louis? Was that in Florida? And it just becomes a blur. And so we wanted the reader right away to see this victim and his humanity. And even though he's not the focus of the story, he is the start of the story in terms of what he's a real character, but a real human that we wanted to feel fully formed and show the ramifications then in all these different directions, not only for Riley and Jen, but then his family and the ripple effect. And so we felt like that was a way to really grab readers with an emotional gut reaction, which is what we want readers and people to have when they hear about these things in the news anyway, that same like emotional punch. It's just harder when you're reading, in a kind of an anonymous headline.
Yeah, that really grabbed me and just hooked me from the very beginning. And I connected with both of the characters, with Riley and Jen. But like Riley, I'm also, former journalist. And so that was, I was like, wow, that's my life there. And so after I left news, I went into corporate communications, which is what I do now. And I'm also co-leading diversity, equity, and inclusion where I work. So as you can imagine, this past year, with everything that's been happening in the news and with the murder of George Floyd, we've been having all these conversations about race. And so many of my white peers, or not so many, but a few will say, oh, I have a Black friend. And sometimes when you hear that I have a Black friend, it's code for I'm not a racist.
Right.
Quite often, and kind of absolve myself and say, no, this is, I'm okay. I'm one of the good ones. And so just wanted you to connect that idea of having a cross-racial friendship with this book and with the story of Jen and Riley. Jo, you want to start with that and then?
I love what you just said about running corporate diversity and inclusion. One of our best events so far during this book was a corporate DEI event where they had bought the book for a small group of employees. They had read it together, and then we did a panel with one Black man and one white man. And like, men are not generally our target audience, like not for no reason other than like they just typically don't read commercial novels written by women, except for the very special ones like Daniel Golden, who love books. But so these men, they read the book and then had such an honest and wonderful conversation about the book. And they were totally different gentlemen. And they both, like everyone in the group, everyone at the company was like, it made it so much easier for us to talk about race through the lens of characters than anything else that we've done. So that it's just, that blew us away. We loved it. But, Christine and I had never seen a friendship like ours in commercial women's fiction, or interracial friendships, just generally portrayed in really rich and authentic ways. And
well, for one, because they're rare too. I mean, like in real life, they're rare.
And they are rare. We say this statistic all the time, which people are blown away by. 75% of white people don't have a close friend of another race. And so the book first and foremost is about lifelong female friendship. And that's something that matters so much to the two of us. Like, we are so close to our group of girlfriends and to each other. And it's like the women in our lives that have gotten us through. And so we wanted readers to come for that. But then, especially readers, white readers who may not have a Black friend, we wanted this book to almost be their Black friend, be a confirmed, so they could just have new ways of starting conversations.
I think something that you said, Nancy, is so interesting, because there are a lot of white people, these people that you mentioned, who will say, I have a Black friend. And it's interesting when we see that statistic play out, because sometimes there's a presumed closeness that might not be there, right? Like, so I'd be interested to talk to their Black friend, for example, to see what they feel about the relationship. Because one thing that Jo and I learned, both in writing this book, but in terms of our friendship and our characters' experience, is that you really can't have an authentic friendship between a Black person and a white person unless you're really willing to talk about race and able to talk about race. And both people are able to be open and fluid about this topic, right? So short of that, then you might have a more superficial relationship, which is maybe what some of these people are describing and people might have. But I think that is the defining feature that's a little bit of an interracial friendship that's a little bit different than a same race friendship, say. And that is what our characters are discovering, right? Like, if this is the thing that we think that we're so close, but because we met as children, Riley and Jen were so young, they never had reason to talk about race. And then they just never developed the muscle, and then they lived long distance and were still friends, but they lived in different cities and so forth. So there were a lot of reasons why they got to adulthood and hadn't had to confront this. And now that they do, they have to be willing and able to go there. And that is what we've been learning people really need to do, and they don't, for lots of different reasons, which we can talk about. But there is this still elephant in the room when it comes to talking about race.
Yeah, this idea of cross-racial friendships is just something that has resonated with me a lot. I actually wrote about it for Real Simple magazine this year, and wrote about my friendship with my friend, Julie Carrick Dalton,
yes,
an author. So it's friendship in Black and white. And I talk about some of the microaggressions and the small and the large moments, and the times when I wanted to tell her things were bothering me, but it was difficult to do it because sometimes you don't want it to be, gosh, she's always talking about race, or it's always about race, or it's just hard to explain. And then, to her credit, I know she's not going to understand a lot of these things unless I tell her, because it's not her experience. And so I just love seeing these kinds of dynamics play out between Riley and Jen in the book. And, so how intentional were you about trying to really dig deep into that idea about a friendship where it's not just surface level, but it's hard to say the hardest things.
Yeah.
No, you so nailed it. And I think when you do have an interracial friendship, as you describe and experience, and as Jo and I have, you do have a unique perspective in terms of like what the challenges of it are, as you just described. And so that's what we were trying to be really intentional about getting down on the page. Riley, by virtue of both her just natural personality, which is to be very compartmentalized and focused and eyes on the prize, and I'm just going to be ambitious and keep my blinders on and not let anything disturb my world at all, including race, or and so she never felt like she wanted to or could bring things up to Jen. And then to Jen's credit, right? Like, how is she supposed to understand or help if Riley's never expressing these things? But at the same time, why would it be always on Riley to bring these things up? That it's always on kind of the person of color to talk about race, as opposed to the white person. So we really do try to get into the vortex of all of those dynamics in a way that the readers can see it from all sides, and then how the characters kind of push through that.
Yeah, and I love Jen too, as the wife of a police officer, and we don't always really delve into that, because a lot of times that's caricature too, when we see it on the news, and many times we're afraid because we see these incidents of white women weaponizing tears, to the detriment of Black and brown people. But yet, Jen just felt like so real, as a real woman with real emotions. She's concerned about her husband. I mean, this is, and I think she says it in the book there that, he's not, and I made note of it, he's not just a symptom of the systemic ills plaguing police forces across America, and that like
He's
this
a
is
real
her husband.
person to her. He's
Yeah,
not
like this is my husband.
yeah.
Yeah, he's the father of her child. Yeah, and it would have been, I mean, actually would have been easier to write Jen and Kevin as a caricature. I mean, like we could have gone in having an agenda, all right, the police officer is a clear villain here, his whole family, they're obviously the worst. And that's not what we wanted to do, because we wanted to show reality. And I have friends who are cops, and we interviewed a lot of police officers, a lot of police officers' wives, which is like, police officer wife is a vibe. It is a full on identity, which is something that we did not know. Like pride and loyalty and camaraderie, which I think that they have to have, because their husbands are going out there and doing a dangerous job. And so they need a support system. But I joked at our McNally event, like, I would never like identify my identity with like my husband's job. He's a climate change consultant. I like don't call myself a climate change wife. But like that was one of the really interesting and surprising things to me, was just to learn about that community. And I think Jen can be frustrating in the book sometimes too for a lot of people, because you're like, Jen, really? But frankly, Jen is like so many white people I know in Philadelphia, and she doesn't think about race, like talk about race with Riley, because she's legitimately never seen that anything bad has happened to Riley because of race. Like she looks at Riley as her most successful, most brilliant, beautiful friend, who has the loving family, who had the hot boyfriend, who got to like travel all over the country. So she doesn't look at Riley as a victim. And I feel like that's why she never brought up race. It wasn't necessarily apathy, but she never felt like she had a reason to. She never saw Riley's trauma.
Yeah, and you both did a nice job of, going beyond race too, and just showing these two women, and where their lives have taken them and the different choices they've made, with Riley following her career as a journalist, and then Jen, being his wife and dealing with motherhood and the struggles of that. And was that intentional to kind of show this full picture of what it means to be a woman, and then what a friendship means when these two women come together?
Yeah, we really wanted to celebrate friendship, and there's something generally, but there's something also really unique about a childhood friend, and that's what we were trying to capture. There's something just you can't recreate in adulthood, right? And who knows even if Riley and Jen would be friends if they met, today in their 30s. But when you meet when you're so young and you're able to be a witness to each person's growth and evolution and all the versions of yourself that you have through childhood into adulthood and all these like critical milestones, you build such a special shared history, which we were trying to get across. And then when your lives do take on different directions and you're an adult, you have different fault lines than you would if you met as an adult, right? So like Riley is concerned that Jen, having a husband now and, having a baby, like what that means for their friendship, which is a very universal thing. I think a lot of women in their friendships, when one friend gets married and has a baby, or doesn't get married, doesn't have a baby, moves, you deal with all the ways that your friendship might be tested or change. And so there's lots of other ways that their friendship is tested or has to change, or they have to figure out, who they are to each other at this moment. That's even beyond, the dramatic incident that starts the novel.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said, Christine, about the testing of a friendship. And I'm thinking about the two of you, Jo and Christine, that
speaking of friendships that have been tested.
Right. You're more than just co-authors. You're also friends. And I'm thinking, in writing a book like this together, where you are dealing with such really raw emotions around race, that could be traumatic. And I know when I talk about race with any friend, but particularly when it's cross-racial, it feels like cutting a vein in a way and kind of, bleeding out in front of someone. And there's this emotional burden that you're carrying. Totally. So talk to me about that with your own friendship in terms of excavating all these really difficult issues around race, and and did it put a strain on the friendship?
It was really, really hard. And we're really honest about that because, we hope to use our friendship in that example, both just the transparency of it, but also what we did about it, right? Because when Joe and I met, which seems a little bit wacky now that we met, and we had this really, I was Joe's editor at Simon and Schuster for her novel, her wonderful novel, Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win. And we had this really great working relationship. And we had the spark of a friendship, but we were still relatively new friends when about a year in, when we decided to write this book together. And I think that would have been hard anyway, right? Like, you're new friends, and then it's like founding a company together, right? Like, we're jumping into this kind of enterprise. And then our book was about race on top of that. And so sometimes I look back and I'm like, what were we thinking? But it really forced us to have kind of the same conversations, more or less, that Riley and Jen have on the page, right? And we've each brought different baggage or fears to the table. And as you said, Nancy, a lot of times as a Black person, you feel really apprehensive and vulnerable about talking about race or sharing your personal experience, because you need to do that for intimacy's sake if you're going to be close to somebody. But at the same time, if you don't know them yet, you're still building trust, and you don't know what their reaction is going to be, right? Are they going to dismiss what you have to say, or, gaslight you? Like, that wasn't a big deal. Like, that happens to everybody. Or, there's any number of kind of predictable or sometimes cliche reactions. And so I was concerned about that. I really was. And I think, Joe had different concerns, and like both of our fears played out, you know what I mean? Like, they both happened.
Yeah. What about you, Joe? What were some of the fears that you experienced?
For my part, I just desperately didn't want to offend. And I wanted to make sure, I didn't want to say anything that was stupid, or just that I didn't say the right words and then I was somehow insulting. And so that was a lot of my fear and anxiety. And so with that, then sometimes when we started talking about race, I did get a little defensive. And then that's the worst for Christine, because then I'm having the reaction she didn't want me to have. And then I see her getting frustrated. And then I'm like, oh, I must have said something wrong or stupid or insulting.
Cycle.
And then this cycle and this loop. And
then she's got to take care of your feelings.
Then she's like, yeah.
Right.
And Christine also, much like our character Riley, is very conflict avoidant as well. Whereas I am much more of an old Italian grandma who I'm like, why? What's going on? And so what we had to do really is get it was almost as if we were going to couples therapy. We had to be like, okay, what is going on with us here? What is wrong? What are you upset about? What am I, what are we actually upset about? And how can we get past this and be honest about our fears and our anxieties? And it wasn't we had one kumbaya conversation and then it was okay. It was over the process of 6 months, and we've been doing this now for 3 years, and now we've been talking about it so much. But it was, I think, so much that we both gave each other grace to have the space to start these conversations. And there's a lot of examples of times in the book, when writing the book and through the process, where issues came up. The big one that we point out a lot is that Riley, in the first pass of writing her character, she just seemed so perfect, and her family seemed so perfect. And I didn't know if they were relatable enough because they just seemed so squeaky clean. And so I try to rough up all of my characters and give them flaws. I mean, Charlotte Walsh, I gave her brother opioid addiction. She had a teen pregnancy. And so I brought up some of those things to Christine. I was like, should we have a teen pregnancy, I'd given to Charlotte, a broken home, maybe Riley's dating a married man, maybe there's something going on with her parents, maybe we had a whole storyline about maybe her dad had an affair with some other lady in the church. And Christine was very, very defensive about that, because she wanted to make sure that we weren't falling into any stereotypes that typically get put on Black women. But for me, I'm I then say the thing that white people say a lot, and that we have the line in our book. And I'm like, not everything is about race. This has nothing to do with race. I'm like, I just want to make a like multifaceted character so that people won't feel like she's like too Tracy Flick perfect. But for Christina, it was about race, and I didn't see it. And I mean, now I do. Now I fully understand it. But that was one of our big first clashes over something that I just couldn't see. That race was a factor in that.
Yeah, and that's something I wrestled with so much in writing my first book too, The Kindest Lie, is that, I wanted to have, like what you were saying, I want my characters, to be really flawed and real and not look perfect. But then I kept thinking, my God, as a Black author, you're thinking about representation too, because there are so many representations of white people in literature that you can have, the white person who's, an opioid addict and who's, a deadbeat and all these things. But for us, we have such limited representations and so many are negative that it's hard to, and so I imagine that's something that you guys struggle with too.
It is, yeah. And, I felt a real, both burden and calling, right? Because the whole point of writing this book, and I've been an editor for so many years, and you want to see stories that reflect a range of experiences, right? And there's so few still, commercial novels that star Black women, where it's not like a sidekick or a secondary character or whatever, but front and center. And with that is a lot of pressure, because that person, we're still on a stage where that person carries a lot of weight, because as you said, Nancy, it's a representative character. It shouldn't be that way, but that's how it is, because when you have so few of anything, like if I'm the only Black person in a room, I represent all Black people almost. So what are the Black readers going to think of this, Christine, is a question I've been asked multiple times. So, that really mattered to me to make her, I'm not too perfect, but to make her not fall into to have a wide berth when it came to any of the common tropes that we see. And that was, I think it resulted in a real, breakthrough moment for us to talk about these things, because then it becomes the same way Jen needs to be aware in the book of like the bigger picture about a lot of these things. Like, I think it was really helpful to see the context of the bigger picture that we're dealing with and that we're writing in.
Yeah, so how did you make choices of who was going to write which character, and did it fall along the racial lines as people would assume, or was there kind of a mix there? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it was a full-on mix. I mean, we were each responsible, I can like very honestly say, for every sentence in this book. We had a really robust outline for it going in, because we sold the book on a partial. We'd written 100 pages, and so we knew the direction we were going in, and each of us would have inspiration at separate times. So it'd be like, okay,
usually at 2 a.m. for me, because I
2 a.m. in the shower, like running, like never when you're sitting in front of the computer. Never.
Yeah.
And, not when you're supposed to get the ideas.
So whichever one of us was like ready to like tackle the chapter, we went mostly chronologically. We're like, all right, I'm going. We have this long text chain of like, I'm going in the dock. All right, let me know when you're out. And then the other one would go in and massage it. And we talked so much in comments in Google Docs of like, you sure this is right? Are you sure? What if we took this out? How, like, and then we would get on the phone later and talk it through. But we completely wrote each of these characters. And I think that was important, because we wanted the book to feel cohesive and not like it was written by two authors. As much as each woman had to have her own distinct voice, the narrative tone had to be the same throughout. And so we had to write everything together.
But having said that, I mean, the reason that's all, our process, but also the flip side to that is the reason that we wanted to write this book together is to bring our unique perspectives to the table, and the different kinds of conversations that we overhear and experience being in different worlds. So it was a lot of that too, like, so making it cohesive, but also, Jo writing about conversations that she's would overhear that I would never be privy to, or Jo writing about motherhood, because that's an experience that she has had that I have not had, and then on the flip side, me writing about a long list of microaggressions I've experienced that we were like, these all cannot go in the book. So we have to pick and choose which ones are going to go in the book. But also that we could draw on, authentic experiences that both of us have had, and also all the interviews that we did, to take it beyond even experiences that the two of us have had.
Yeah. So getting deeper into the writing process, we've talked about, Christine, how you have had a long career as an editor in publishing, and that you were actually an editor for Jo. And so I'm wondering, how did that dynamic impact the experience? Because were you always approaching things, Christine, as, with your editor hat on? And then Jo, was it like for you coming at it, working with someone who has been an editor, and did that impact the writing and the editing process and some of that push and pull?
Yeah, I had to check my writing ego at the door, which was tough because I've collaborated on books before, but I've always been the writer on them. And so it was really difficult in the beginning for me in the beginning, we like took on our old roles. And because I'm like, I don't get writer's block. I used to be a newspaper journalist. It's like, if you don't turn in your copy on deadline, you're just like, especially in an old newsroom, you'd get some real fresh language thrown at you. And so the blank page doesn't scare me, but Christine, like, the blank page can be terrifying. She's like, oh, no. But once there were any words on it, then she's like, oh, I could rewrite this. I could rip this up. But I do remember in the early days, like, I'd hand it over to Christine, and all of a sudden, like, what I'd written, it would just be gone. And I'm like, I thought it was really good, right? And then writing is so subjective. So I'm like, why did she hate it? Why does she hate me? And like,
Personal.
Quick spiral. It's a very quick spiral.
And that was also like some of the early tensions too. So, where I'm like, I felt like almost slighted, and then we had the racial tensions on, and that's why it was really rough going for 4 months. But then I also think as we got through our difficult race conversations, we also just started to trust each other more. And so, like, I now trust Christine, like, with absolutely everything. If, like, we're co-writing an essay for something, as we've written dozens of them now for the launch, like, I'll be like, you take this, I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Well, it's fine. Like, we share a brain at this point. And we're working on a new novel now. We're about 100 pages in, and it's so much smoother. But it's really,
all the kinks worked out.
I know. This
but
one
I think that, that was, I didn't have a writerly ego because I had never written before, right? So I didn't come with that muscle. I was really I had so much of an editor's hat on, and so focused on, like, productivity, right? Like, this makes sense in my mind. Like, let's, this chapter 1, like, and what I really underestimated is, until, I got into writing more myself, is the, how vulnerable you feel. I mean, you said earlier about how you feel like you cut your veins when you talk about race, but I think it's also, you feel similarly when you're sharing your work for the first time, or you're, especially in a raw stage. And having never done that, I didn't have that experience with the emotional vulnerability of that, right? So I think I just underestimated. I was like, yeah, we're just getting this done. I wasn't.
What did you do?
Good, it's all good. I just had
your light.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Just an old family picture fell.
Oh,
this is my family from the early 19th century. Anyway,
we got to see that. That's a
yeah. This is literally the ancestors looking
down.
Literally.
Yes, literally.
They have thoughts.
You're like, you are our wildest dream.
And so once I understood that a little bit better, and now, I do, that was a surprise and a learning curve for me in the process. And I think, has made me a better editor, because I just understand that emotional dynamic now of all the swirl of emotions that go into showing somebody your work.
Yeah, and I can imagine it'll make you a little more considerate when you're editing other people's work, that now you've got the
For
experience
sure.
of being an author too. that you can empathize.
Sure, for sure. And that's what's been great about this experience too. I think it's nice to see the publishing process from all different angles and to wear so many hats and to do something. I mean, just in general, for anybody trying to do something completely different, kind of mid-career, like I'm in my 40s, to start and like say, now I'm going to try my hand at this, I feel like is I hope encouraging to other people who might not be starting to write, but like, wanting to try their hand at something else.
Yeah. We're going to be taking questions. So I see a few questions are already in the Q&A. So be sure to put your questions in there and I'll get to them in just a minute. Jo, you alluded to the fact that you guys are, did you say 100 pages in or, to a new book? Can you tell us anything about it? Give us any kind of sneak preview? And is this going to be a trend? You guys, like a new thing that you're going to be co-writing together from here on out?
Stuck with me, Jo.
Yes, that's what we would like to do. That is the current plan. We can't say a whole lot because we are still like in the submission phase for it, but different characters, although there is an Easter egg in this book that gives a little bit of the plot of the next book, which we had forgotten that we put until Deborah Roberts brought it up to us.
Okay. Are you still going to
be a reader? That one, a close reader.
And I'm like, you're good, Deborah Roberts.
Yeah, I know. See, she's a journalist. She's good.
I know.
Are you still addressing race though? I mean, are you still?
And that's our goal, is to talk about race in intimate spaces and intimate relations, because so much of the national dialogue has turned so ugly and nasty when it comes to race, that we want to, and it almost feels too big for people. It's like this big, gigantic, the biggest elephant in the room. But we feel like if we can show how race impacts us on such a micro level, one-on-one, like that, it can help breed so much more empathy and sympathy and make it easier to talk about, because it's not, this giant thing. It's like your best friend, and everyone has a best friend.
Or an abstraction, right?
Yeah.
So in each book we want to take, like, this book was a friendship and the next book is just a different kind of relationship, but the same idea of, how that relationship and that community around this particular relationship, responds to another, in a way, dramatic event, like a rip from the headlines kind of event.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's what I'm, planning on for my career too, doing something similar. And I think with going through this racial reckoning in the country, kind of like what you said, I mean, so many people, particularly in white America, have been doing their anti-racism reading, there's a whole curriculum out there around that. And most of it is nonfiction. And I do think there's power in, books like yours and mine to really get people to, kind of sneaks in there, I think, that understanding with story and character. So
can you tell it? We like to turn our interviews to the interviewer. Can you tell us what you're working on next? As big fans of yours, what can we read soon?
That's so sweet. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so I have a contract with William Morrow HarperCollins for a book 2. It's called People of Means. And so, so it's I'm going a little more historical this time. So it's dual timeline, and it's a story about an upper middle class mother and daughter, both of them coming of age at different moments of racial reckoning in the country. So the mother is coming of age in 1960 as a student at Fisk University at the time of the sit-ins, and then her daughter coming of age in 1992 in Chicago, but at the time of the acquittal of the 4 white officers for the beating of Rodney King. Yep, so it's about ambition, purpose, love, resistance, all of that. So I'm excited.
So are we. We can't wait.
So we only got send it as soon as it's ready for readers.
Can you email us a manuscript tonight?
I know, like tonight. As soon as I have one done, I will pick you up on that when I have an advanced copy. Make sure you guys get to
we would
read it. Yeah. Love to have your blurb.
Oh my God,
of course. We it was so important for us that this be a novel, because we just think fiction touches people in such a totally different way. You approach it with like a different level of openness and maybe joy too, than you would nonfiction. We did not want to be preachy. We didn't want
it to feel like homework.
And we joke, we're like, you come for the friendship in this book and stay for the social justice. But it's true.
We're gonna get t-shirts with that.
We'll get t-shirts. But
Jill and I love to get a t-shirt with a saying on it or a
I
mug.
love that.
The best mug that I ever bought Christine. So like we totally have like little like couple annoyances with each other. And Christine loves an M dash. Like
I do, I really do.
Oh, yeah.
but she doesn't know how to make them.
I don't.
Doesn't. 2 dashes.
Is it the 2 dashes and then?
Yeah, because in Word it does it for you. In Google Docs it doesn't.
Oh.
Yeah, and so I made her a mug that says, "How do you make an M dash? Control or Alt."
Okay, I didn't know that.
And I still
That's
don't.
like, thank
Still
you.
doesn't do it. Still doesn't do it. Mm-mm.
That's hilarious. You guys are great. So let's get to the questions that
Absolutely.
have been coming in. Okay.
There's 2 from my mother-in-law.
Oh, are there? What's
Uh-huh.
her name?
Sarah Astor.
Okay. Yep.
Hi,
Yep.
Patsy.
Patsy!
Oh, how cool. Okay, so first one from Christina Powers. What was the most difficult part of the book to write and how did you approach it? Whichever wants to take that one.
Chapter 1. I don't know why we really struggled with chapter 1 so much, you guys. It was brutal. I mean, I think because it was, I don't even know. We needed to start the book with Riley, or we wanted to, and like just establishing both her character and the friendship at the same time and the animating event. It just felt like this chapter had to do so much and we were never getting it right. And we kept writing other, we would, like Jo said, we had this detailed outline. So we would just keep writing later chapters and then come back. And it was really brutal. I have to say, I mean, really, I don't have anything to compare it to because I've never written a first chapter before. I hear that first chapters can be hard. But we got stuck on it a lot. And I think it was a matter of just pushing through and pushing through and pushing through, and coming back to it and coming back to it. This is also a fun fact that Riley used to have 4 brothers. There were 5 of them all together. And then we were like, there's
too many brothers.
Way too many brothers.
Yeah.
So they do not exist anymore.
Yep. I know what you mean.
R.I.P. like Roger. I mean, I can't even remember all their names. John. I can't even remember all their names.
I know.
R.I.P. Riley's brother.
And then you condensed all of the brothers into one, right?
I also went back. We've changed names in this book so many times. And I went back and looked at the first notes we had when you sent me the first Google Doc. Riley's name was Kimberly.
Really?
Yes.
God, I didn't even remember that. Wow.
Mm-hmm. I had no
That's
recollection.
a trip down memory lane. Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Kimberly.
Kimberly.
Kimberly. Nice name.
Yeah.
It's a nice name. It's a nice name. Kimberly and Jennifer, the 2 very 80s, 90s baby names.
Totally.
Okay, so Maxwell Gregory from the bookseller community says, I love that you wrote this together, but can you explain how your writing process works? So anything that we didn't already talk about with the writing process that you want to explain exactly how you did it?
I mean, I think we brainstormed together a lot to get this particular book started. I mean, even it's funny that Jo, went back to our early docs, because before we wrote a lot, we did have to talk about who these characters were. And that was more on the phone and, like, who is at the time Kimberly, like, what does she do? How do they meet? Why are they friends? Who's married? Who has a love interest? Yeah, like we just had to figure a lot out that build them out besides, just like we knew what was going to happen to start the book, but otherwise we didn't know a lot about who these women were. And so that was a lot of brainstorming. And then once we did that, like we said, we had a detailed outline and a shared Google Doc. And then we went back and forth in that shared Google Doc to write actual scenes.
And then, I think the best thing that we did is we read everything out loud to each other many, many times. And it just, especially for dialogue, I think it makes it so much richer when you can hear it read out loud. And it's hard to do that without a co-author, right? Like I can read my own stuff, like my husband is never going to read my manuscript out loud with me. I'm like lucky if I can get him to read it once. Christine, also in that first document of like notes, Jen had 3 kids and was pregnant.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
God, our characters have really come a long way.
It's amazing when you look at the evolution, you go back to your
Totally. When you see
drafts.
where
Oh
you
my
started.
God.
I mean, yeah, you were saying how like drastically different your versions were. So it's
I know. I had 4 point of view characters in the beginning and then went down to 2. And yeah, so it's just.
the other 2 are where Riley's brothers are.
There you go. There you go.
In
They're
the
all together.
literary hinterland.
We are. They're hanging out.
Character heaven.
I know. Joe, did you say that Sarah asked her, is that your mother-in-law?
That's my mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law. Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, she's got 2 questions in there. Awesome. And so you've answered part of this, but can you talk about your writing each chapter together rather than separating the authorship? She said, I think this is very effective and shows that 2 friends from different backgrounds can build together. And so did you think about just kind of writing them just like separately, like one just like
No, it
one and
never
one like
even
the other?
occurred to us to do that. No, I mean, I think I knew there's some stuff that you just intuitive. I mean, Joe knows this too from being a writer for so long. And I know from being an editor that never works, right? So I just intuitively knew that just like writing you were going to have 2 separate voices if we took 2 separate characters. So I think from the beginning, it was not even something we were going to try because we already knew that wouldn't work. And that's the easiest way. I mean, the biggest pitfall when you're writing a book that has 2 or more narrators is that either the voices sound too similar, like they sound like the writer, or they're so disjointed that you have you like one storyline and you don't like the other just because the writing styles are so different, right? So you find yourself wanting to like skip through one set of chapters to get to the other. And so we being aware of that fault line, we were going to avoid it altogether. We knew how to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And so also from Sarah, our mother-in-law, she has 2 questions about research. So I'm going to kind of combine those research questions in terms of who you talk to, just for the authenticity. One is, did you talk to any African-American police officers to see what they might think of the story? And then did you talk to anybody who had gone through something similar, a cop's wife or a cop who was involved in a shooting or an accidental death? So talk about that research process.
Yeah, we talked to one Black male police officer, and it was just so interesting to hear.
So fascinating.
Yeah, so fascinating.
And we read his book. He's also the author of a book. So he wrote a memoir about his experience as a Black.
Is that like that Black and Blue or
Yes,
Black?
yes,
I've heard about that one. Yeah.
And so we read that and we talked to him, and just, hearing the systemic and inherent racism that does pervade a lot of the police departments, he was able to give us a perspective that a white police officer would not have been able to give us because they may not have noticed it, or they wouldn't tell us. They would be ashamed of telling us. And so his insights were great. Interviewed a bunch of police wives. We interviewed a police wife
therapist.
Yes.
Did you say again?
A police therapist, like a woman who works with like first responders couples, because that's such a stressful, obviously, dynamic. And I jumped in with that because she was one of my favorite interviews.
She was one of my favorites too. Yeah. And she had done therapy for a lot of officer involved shootings. And so talked to the officers afterwards. And then, we talked to the mothers of shooting victims and shooting victims themselves. I started doing a podcast at the same time about gun violence in Philadelphia, for the Philadelphia Citizen. It's called Philly Under Fire. And for that, I interviewed so many mothers. And we wrote about that for Lit Hub. It was important for us that Justin's, the shooting of the 14-year-old boy and his mother, that their family didn't feel like a caricature, or that we were using him. Like we're just using his death and his headline to drive the other parts of the story. So that was why we wanted to open with Justin, because we wanted to give him agency. And we ended the book with his mother's voice so that we can, she can own her story too. And that was so important to us to get that right. Because when we started this book, and the thing that I kept thinking over and over again, I'm like, the media is terrible. I mean, I can go on and on about how I think the media has changed since the days when we were in journalism, and it does no one any favors. You never see the humanity behind these headlines. And we wanted to give each of these characters humanity. So no one is perfect. No one is a villain. They're real flawed human beings. So yeah, that was,
I love that.
the interviews were really, really important to be able to achieve that. And for me, I mean, I am a reporter first and foremost, and I report things out to try to understand them better. That's how I've always lived my life. And so Christine was very influenced in a very personal way by all of the stories that we were seeing about violence against Black bodies in America. And I was very influenced by all of the stories and about how the media treated these stories. So we were coming at it from very different, but very passionate places.
I love it. It's kind of like you really needed to feel that and experience that to be able to really write from a genuine place. That's beautiful. Anissa Armstrong is like a major reader. You know, she's involved in so many reading communities.
Love it, Anissa.
Yes, Anissa's great. She says, what was your biggest hurdle in writing a book together?
I think the communication factor, like we had three kind of complexities. One, that we were new to this, especially me, like new to writing. We had logistical, I wouldn't even say challenges, but we had logistical things to figure out because we didn't live in the same place. We had technology things to figure out because that's just how are we going to actually mechanically do this? And then we had creative things to figure out, right? Like what our characters going to do. And then we had race to figure out. So we had to we had those 4 arenas of complexity that we had to kind of tackle one by one, or really all at once, because you can't even isolate those. They were all happening at once. And so we almost can't narrow it down to one challenge because we were dealing with those 4 challenges at once. So if we could bridge them all, I think it would be to say, and tell me if you disagree, Jo, it would be like the beginning, right? Like we had to deal like those first few months, as Jo was talking about. I think that happens in any relationship or change in jobs or whatever. Like you have a learning curve, right? Like I changed careers in fact, right? And we started doing this together, and we had a learning curve that we had to get through. And that was, 3 or 4 months of rocky.
Yeah, I would say, Christine and I joke sometimes, we're like, we could write a whole book about communication right now for like married couples. Because we really did have to learn how to communicate in different ways. So like when my heart was broken, when Christine would destroy a sentence, but she didn't know that was happening and I didn't say anything. So we had to create a shorthand for like, what is important to you? You tell me what is important to you so that I don't remove it, or so that we can talk about it. Because I was like expecting her to read my mind, and I feel like so many couples do that. So we had to be really, really intentional from the beginning about explaining exactly our process and how it worked and how we want to be talked to. Like, do you prefer texting? Do you prefer emailing? Like, if we're going to be talking about this kind of thing. And Christina and I, luckily, our work ethic is the same. You can't do this with someone if your work ethic isn't the same. I mean, we're just both workhorses. And if either of us were to slack, I don't think our collaboration would have survived, because you need to be, I genuinely feel, and like, we put in an absolutely equal amount of labor for this, from everything from the writing to the publicity to the editing. Like, we're both showing up.
And you'd be really resentful if
it
wasn't showing up.
Yeah. No, and that is happening.
And that's a dynamic. Of all the complexities we had, I think it's interesting that we were so simpatico in that way, that's a dynamic we never experienced, of like, one of us is not working hard enough, or like, I feel like I'm doing more, or like we never had that, or that was not something that we had to. If anything, we're like in a competition to outwork each other.
That's a good problem to have. So I know we're at the top of the hour, but we got one more question. We close it out. This is from Jessica in the chat. She says, you said in another event that the title of the book, We Are Not Like Them. She said that title was there from the start. Is it on purpose that it's never said in the book, so the readers can determine who is us and who is them? Very good question.
It is a really good question, especially I have to say I'm a sucker. This is just me speaking as a reader, not even as, you know, an editor or publishing person. I'm always a sucker for when the title is in the book. For some reason, I just love that. So I think if we could have made it that way, we might have, because I just think that that is really cool and that happens. And then you get it, you know, in the context of whatever passage it came in. But we ironically had this title, if you from the very beginning, before we actually wrote a word. This is one of the things that came at 2 a.m., you know, when I'm scrolling through my phone. I really, really need to sleep more. If anybody has any sleeping remedies out there, please tell me. But we liked it because it worked on a couple levels, right? Because I mean, we've talked a lot in this call about, or this Zoom, about our tribalism these days, right? Everybody is like, oh, I'm not like that. Oh, that's those people do that. Those people, I'm this, you know. And so the title really captured that. And it's a title that we came up with in 2018, right? Especially like in that moment. That's when all these divisions were even becoming more extreme. And then the title works on another level, and that it's about Riley and Jen's friendship, and that they're so close and they have this special bond from when they were children. So their special thing is we're not like them, you know what I mean? Like we have our own bubble that we are like protected in. And it's nice to think about a friendship in that way, and, you know, in a positive way, like we have something special.
Great. This was just such an amazing conversation.
It was such a treat.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
Had so much fun with you two, and so insightful. And love this book. You guys, you got to buy it. Got to get it. We are not like them, and you'll just love it. And we'll also look for
book plates. Look at all the book plates.
Oh, we got book plates.
Oh, I love it.
And
sign it right on this very table.
Yeah, you know, we also are like, we're really encouraging people to do a buddy read, to grab the book for a friend, so you can talk about it. And we're also encouraging people, you know, if you don't have a friend who isn't like you, like geographic diversity, economic diversity, racial diversity, we're now becoming Tinder for reader friends who want to match up and read the book together. And we've gotten so many emails and instant messages. I now have like a database of women who I will start connecting once I finally sit down and breathe, maybe tomorrow.
And I learned that we were doing this on Instagram. I read Jo's Instagram. Christina and I are starting a buddy read program. I was like, oh, this looks fun. I guess we're doing this.
I knew she'd be okay with it. Yeah.
I love it. I love the idea. I love it so much.
Well, we've got a bunch of links to purchase the book, to purchase Nancy's book, to purchase the book that Jo wrote and Christina edited. Which we
so
have
many different connections with all the books.
We don't have the one for the book that wasn't quite finished yet because we don't know what it's called. I will say, if I learned one thing from this event, is don't assume that writing with another person makes it any easier.
Yeah. Don't assume that. No. Just a different, harder in different ways, but
it makes it. But we do have more fun, and the fact that
it's much less lonely
together, especially the spring part. Like we're having a very good time.
Yeah. Like I want to be friends with you guys.
You are. You're in the crew now. Every person that we've done in a Zoom event with, we've somehow planned like lunches, vacations, trips, visits.
I love it. I'd love to
be in Chicago soon.
And Daniel, I'll see you over Thanksgiving.
Shockingly enough, I'll be here.
Come see me, Daniel, too, in Chicago.
Woohoo! Yes, we'll plan something. Thank you to our authors and our conversation partner and everyone in the audience. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. And I guess I should give a shout out to Maxwell at Lake Forest Bookshop. Bookstore, go shop there as well. So, or buy the book there. What the heck? And I can even send you some book plates if I have any left. I don't know.
We'll sign more.
We've signed about 10,000 book plates.
Special.
And because of COVID, we're not in person. So, I mean, this is like boring inside baseball, but we have to sign them and then UPS
them
another one. And so, yeah.
An operation.
Get lost all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see my friend Elizabeth was here. Hi, Elizabeth.
Oh, I love Elizabeth.
No, you know, this is like the world is so small. Elizabeth and I know each other for New York Publishing. Oh my
Yes,
God.
well, I know, yes, she is. That's right. Of course you would know her.
Yes!
Oh my God. It
Oh,
is.
Elizabeth's a
All
good
right.
friend. Oh, this is so fun.
We'll go through the whole list and see who we know in common later.
I know.
I know, I want a copy of the chat now.
Yeah, we have to look at all the
I do
attendees.
keep
and
that. I will
that
send them.
7
I will
degrees
send-
of Kevin Bacon or whatever.
Yeah.
We're all connected. This is so wonderful. Thank you.
So
guys.
wonderful. Thank you guys. This was really,
A
really
lot of fun.
great
Thank
to
you.
have
Thanks,
today.
Daniel, for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks so
bye.
much, Nancy. Okay,
All
bye-bye.
right.